A starving orphan girl begs for help from a billionaire CEO who coldly rejects her, saying, "I don't help strangers." As she leaves, her torn birth certificate falls from her backpack. The businessman discovers in shock that Elizabeth is his biological daughter he never knew existed. After desperately searching the city for her, he learns she died of starvation, and he was the last person who denied her help. Crushed by guilt, he dedicates his fortune to a children's charity, vowing never again to let such a tragedy occur. Before we begin this heart-wrenching story, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement means the world to us. Robert Harrison adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of his black Bentley onto the pristine sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. At 42, he was Manhattan's most ruthless CEO, worth $3.2 billion, and he wore his success like armor. The October morning air was crisp, matching his perfectly pressed charcoal suit and the coldness that had settled in his heart years ago. "Mr. Harrison, the quarterly reports are waiting," his assistant Margaret called from behind, struggling to keep pace with his long strides toward Harrison Industries' gleaming tower. Robert barely acknowledged her, his steel-grey eyes fixed on the revolving glass doors ahead. He had built his empire from nothing, clawing his way up from a broken childhood in Detroit's slums. Every dollar earned, every company acquired, every competitor crushed. It all served one purpose, ensuring he would never be vulnerable again. The homeless population around his building had grown significantly over the past months, he noticed with mild annoyance. Security usually kept them away from the main entrance, but today seemed different. As he approached the building, a small figure separated from the shadows near the loading dock. "Please, sir, please help me." The voice was so soft, so broken, that Robert almost didn't hear it over the traffic noise. He turned to see a little girl, no more than 8 years old, standing in clothes that were more holes than fabric. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face that was gaunt with hunger. But her brown eyes, there was something about those eyes that made him pause for just a moment. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," she whispered, clutching a torn backpack against her chest like a shield. "My mama. She died last month, and I don't have anywhere to go. Could you maybe spare some money for food, just a little bit?" Robert's jaw tightened. He had heard it all before. The sob stories, the manipulations, the lies people told to separate him from his money. His success had made him a target for every con artist, beggar, and opportunist in the city. "I don't help strangers," he said, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Get a job. Learn to work for what you want instead of begging for handouts." The little girl's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. Something in her expression reminded Robert of himself at that age, proud even in desperation, refusing to show weakness even when the world was crushing down. "I understand, sir. Thank you anyway." Her words were barely audible as she turned to walk away, her shoulders slumping with defeat. Robert watched her go, already dismissing the encounter from his mind as he strode toward his building. He had more important things to worry about than some random street kid. The merger with Patterson Corp needed his attention, and the board meeting at 10 would determine the future of his latest acquisition. But as he reached for the door handle, something white caught his eye on the sidewalk where the girl had been standing. A piece of paper, torn and yellowed with age, fluttered in the morning breeze. Robert glanced around, seeing the girl's small figure disappearing around the corner. She must have dropped it from that raggedy backpack. His first instinct was to ignore it. What did he care about some homeless kid's garbage? But curiosity, that dangerous trait that had both made his fortune and haunted his past, got the better of him. He bent down and picked up the paper, unfolding it carefully. The official seal of New York State stared back at him, and the words, "Certificate of Birth," made his blood run cold. Child's name, Elizabeth Marie Harrison. Date of birth, October 15th, 2015 father, Robert Michael Harrison. Mother, Sarah Jane Collins. The paper trembled in his hands as the impossible truth hit him like a physical blow. The girl, that little girl he had just turned away, was his daughter. His daughter whose existence he had never known, whose mother's name brought back memories he had buried for nearly a decade. Sarah. Beautiful, gentle Sarah, who had loved him before he became the monster success had made him. Sarah, who had left him 8 years ago when his obsession with wealth began consuming everything good in his life. She had been pregnant when she left, but she never told him. She had raised their daughter alone, and now... Oh, God, Robert whispered, his voice breaking as he stared at the birth certificate. Oh, God, what have I done? The date on the certificate showed Elizabeth had turned 8 just yesterday. 8 years old, and he had never held her, never read her a bedtime story, never been there for a single moment of her life. And when she finally came to him, desperate and starving, he had turned her away without a second thought. His hands shaking, Robert looked up to where Elizabeth had disappeared. But the street was empty except for the usual morning rush of business people and commuters. She was gone, vanished into the maze of New York streets like a ghost from his past, come to deliver the most devastating message of his life. Robert burst through the glass doors of his building, the birth certificate clutched in his white-knuckled fist. The familiar marble lobby, with its soaring ceilings and imported Italian fixtures, felt foreign now, like a monument to all his wrong choices. "Margaret!" he barked at his assistant, who was reviewing emails on her tablet near the elevator bank. "Cancel everything. Cancel the board meeting, cancel the Patterson merger calls, cancel my lunch with the investors. Everything." Margaret's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up in surprise. In 15 years of working for Robert Harrison, she had never seen him cancel important meetings, let alone all of them at once. "Sir, the Patterson merger is worth $400 million. The board members are already on their way. I don't care if it's worth $4 billion. Robert's voice echoed through the lobby, causing several employees to stop and stare. "Tell them I'll reschedule. Tell them whatever you want. But I need every available security guard, every contact in the NYPD, every private investigator we've ever used. I need them all, and I need them now." Margaret had seen Robert angry before, had watched him destroy competitors and fire executives without blinking. But this was different. There was something desperate in his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "Mr. Harrison, what exactly are we looking for?" Robert's hand trembled as he showed her the birth certificate. A little girl, about 8 years old, dark hair, brown eyes. She's wearing torn clothes and carrying a raggedy backpack. Her name is Elizabeth Harrison, and she's... His voice caught. "She's my daughter." The color drained from Margaret's face. She had worked for Robert long enough to know about his past, about the woman named Sarah who had left him when his ambition began eating him alive. But a daughter, this was news that changed everything. "How long has she been missing?" Margaret asked, already reaching for her phone. "She's not missing. She was here 10 minutes ago asking for help." Robert's voice broke on the last word. "And I turned her away. I told her to get a job. My own daughter was starving, begging me for food. And I told her, I don't help strangers." Margaret felt her heart clench. She had seen Robert's ruthless side for years, but she had also glimpsed the man beneath the armor, the one who worked 18-hour days, not just for money, but to outrun demons from a childhood he never talked about. "We'll find her, Mr. Harrison. I'll mobilize everyone we have." Within an hour, Robert had transformed the 32nd floor conference room into a command center. Security cameras from every building within a 6-block radius were being reviewed. 3 private investigation firms had teams on the street. Police contacts were checking homeless shelters, hospitals, and social services. But as the hours ticked by, Elizabeth remained a ghost. The street cameras showed her leaving the area around Robert's building at 8:47 a.m. But after that, nothing. She had vanished into the city as completely as if she had never existed. "Sir." "Hey!" Detective Maria Santos, from the NYPD's Missing Persons Unit, sat across from Robert in the conference room, her notebook filled with details. "I need to ask about the mother, Sarah Collins. When did you last see her?" Robert stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, wondering how many children like Elizabeth were out there. Invisible and forgotten, 8 years ago. She left me when she found out she was pregnant, said I had become someone she didn't recognize anymore. Did she tell you she was leaving? She tried to. Robert's reflection in the window looked like a stranger to him now. I was closing a deal with some investors from Tokyo. $300 million acquisition. She came to my office, said she needed to talk, that it was important. I told her it would have to wait until after the deal closed. Detective Santos waited, sensing there was more. The deal took 6 weeks to finalize. When I finally went home, she was gone. Just a note saying she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore, and that she hoped someday I'd remember who I used to be. Robert's voice was hollow. I never went after her. My pride wouldn't let me. I figured if she wanted to leave, good riddance. And you had no idea she was pregnant? None. If I had known. Robert trailed off. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure what he would have done. 8 years ago, he was already too far down the path that had led him here, to a glass tower that was more prison than palace, surrounded by employees who feared him, and a life that was rich in everything, except the things that actually mattered. We've checked all the hospitals in Manhattan, Detective Santos continued. No Elizabeth Harrison or Collins has been admitted in the past month. We're expanding the search to the other boroughs. As if on cue, Margaret entered the room with a grim expression. Mr. Harrison, I have some information. I found records of Sarah Collins. She... Margaret hesitated, glancing at the detective. Just tell me, Robert said, though every instinct warned him he didn't want to know. She died 6 weeks ago. Lung cancer. She was in the charity ward at Bellevue for 3 months before that. According to hospital records, Elizabeth was listed as her only next of kin. The room went silent except for the distant hum of city traffic 42 floors below. Robert felt something break inside his chest, a sound like glass shattering in the depths of his soul. Sarah was gone. The woman who had loved him before he became this monster, the mother of his child, had died alone in a charity ward while he was closing deals and counting money, and Elizabeth, their daughter, had been left with nothing and no one. There's more, Margaret said softly. I found the address where they were living. It's not good, sir. The address Margaret had found led Robert to a part of Manhattan he had forgotten existed, despite having grown up in similar circumstances in Detroit. The East Village tenement building was a monument to urban decay, crumbling brick facade, windows covered with cardboard, and a front entrance that looked like it might collapse at any moment. Are you sure you want to go up there, sir? Asked Tom, Robert's head of security, as they stood outside the building. The October afternoon had turned grey and cold, matching Robert's mood. I need to see where she lived, Robert replied, studying the building that had housed his daughter for the last years of her short life. I need to understand. They climbed 3 flights of stairs that creaked ominously under their weight, past doors with multiple locks and the sounds of lives lived in desperation. The hallway smelled of mildew, cooking grease, and broken dreams. Apartment 3B had a door that didn't quite close properly, held shut by a piece of rope tied to a nail. Through the gap, Robert could see into the single room that had been Elizabeth and Sarah's world, The superintendent, a weathered man named Mickey, who looked older than his 50-something years, had agreed to let them in after Robert showed him Elizabeth's birth certificate and explained the situation. "Sarah was a good lady," Mickey said as he untied the rope. "Quiet, never caused trouble, always made sure the little girl stayed clean and went to school, even when times got real tough. Lot of folks around here, they give up, you know, but not Sarah. She fought right up until the end." The door swung open, and Robert stepped into his daughter's world. The room was maybe 12 feet by 10 feet, with a single window that looked out onto an air shaft. There was a fold-out couch that had seen better days, a hot plate on a wooden crate that served as a kitchen, and a corner sectioned off by a hanging sheet where Elizabeth had slept on a pile of blankets. But what struck Robert most were the details that spoke of love, surviving in impossible circumstances. The walls were covered with Elizabeth's drawings, crayon pictures of houses with gardens, families holding hands, dogs and cats, and sunshine. On the makeshift nightstand next to Sarah's bed was a photograph in a cracked frame. Sarah, young and radiant, holding a baby Elizabeth. Both of them were smiling. "Sarah worked 3 jobs," Mickey continued, watching Robert take in the scene. "Cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at the grocery store, and doing seamstress work from home when she could find it. Never complained, not once, even when she got sick. She kept working until she couldn't anymore." Robert picked up a notebook from the couch. Sarah's handwriting, familiar after all these years, filled page after page. It was a journal, and as he read, his heart broke a little more with each entry. March 15th. "Elizabeth asked about her father today. I told her he was a good man who lived far away. She said maybe someday he would come find us. I hope she never stops believing in fairy tales." April 22nd. "The doctor says the cancer is spreading. I need to figure out what's going to happen to Elizabeth. I've been thinking about calling Robert, but what would I say? That I kept his daughter from him for 8 years? That I'm dying and she needs him now?" May 10th. "Elizabeth made me a Mother's Day card at school. She drew a picture of us in a big house with a garden. She said when she grows up, she's going to be rich so she can take care of me. My heart is breaking." June 3rd. "I'm getting worse. I tried to call Robert's office today, but I lost my nerve. How do you tell someone they have a daughter? How do you ask for help from someone you walked away from?" The entries continued through Sarah's final weeks, each one revealing the depth of her love for Elizabeth and her growing desperation about their future. The last entry was dated just 5 days before Sarah died, October 10th. "I told Elizabeth about her father today. Told her his name, where he works. If something happens to me, maybe she'll be brave enough to find him. Maybe he's changed. Maybe he'll love her the way she deserves to be loved. I pray every night that I'm wrong about who he's become." Robert's hands shook as he closed the notebook. Sarah had tried to call him. In her final weeks, dying and desperate, she had reached out, and he had been unreachable, protected by layers of assistance and security that kept the real world at bay. "What happened after Sarah died?" Robert asked Mickey, his voice barely above a whisper. Mickey's expression grew even more somber. "Social services came, but Elizabeth ran. Smart kid, she knew what foster care meant. Been living rough since then, trying to make it on her own. Comes by sometimes, sleeps in the basement when it gets real cold. I try to help when I can, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "When did you last see her?" 3 days ago. She was asking around the neighborhood, trying to find out about some businessman named Harrison. Said she needed to find him because her mama told her he might help." Mickey looked at Robert with new understanding. "That was you, wasn't it? She found you." Robert nodded, unable to speak. Elizabeth had spent 3 days searching for him, asking strangers about a father she had never met, believing against all odds that he would help her. And when she finally found the courage to approach him, when she swallowed her pride and begged for help, He had destroyed her with his cruelty. In the corner of the room, behind Elizabeth's makeshift bed, Robert found her few possessions: a worn stuffed rabbit, some pencils and paper, a small wooden box. Inside the box were treasures that broke his heart: a pretty button, a smooth stone, a photograph of Sarah smiling, and at the bottom, a piece of paper with his name and business address written in Sarah's careful handwriting. Elizabeth had carried his name with her like a prayer, believing that somewhere in the city was a man who would love and protect her. Instead, she had found a monster in an expensive suit who couldn't see past his own selfish fear. "We need to find her," Robert said, his voice fierce with determination. "Tonight, before it's too late." But even as he said the words, Robert feared that too late had already come and gone on a Tuesday morning when he chose cruelty over compassion and turned away the most important person in his world. The search for Elizabeth intensified as night fell over Manhattan. Robert had mobilized every resource at his disposal: private investigators, police contacts, security firms, even offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts. Missing person flyers with Elizabeth's description were being distributed throughout the city, but Elizabeth Harrison was proving to be as elusive as smoke. "Sir, we've checked every shelter in Manhattan and Brooklyn," Margaret reported as Robert paced the conference room that had become his command center. "The Bronx teams are still canvassing, and we have people checking the subway tunnels where homeless populations sometimes gather." Robert stopped pacing and stared at the map of New York City that covered one entire wall, marked with colored pins showing areas already searched. Each pin represented another dead end, another moment Elizabeth remained lost in the urban wilderness. "She's just a little girl," he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. It was nearly midnight, and he hadn't eaten since breakfast, but food was the last thing on his mind. 8 years old, alone in this city. It's October, and it's getting cold at night. Detective Santos entered the room with a tablet in her hands. "Mr. Harrison, we may have something." Street cameras picked up a small figure matching Elizabeth's description near Washington Square Park around 6 p.m. The image quality isn't great, but it could be her. Robert was putting on his coat before Santos finished speaking. "Let's go." Washington Square Park at night was a different world from the bustling daytime scene of street performers and chess players. Shadows pooled beneath the trees, and the homeless population claimed the benches as temporary sanctuaries from the cold. Robert moved through the park with Santos and 2 officers, showing Elizabeth's school photo to anyone willing to talk. "Yeah, I seen her," said an elderly man huddled in layers of coats near the fountain. "Little girl with dark hair, carrying a backpack. She was here earlier, asking people if they knew where she could find food. Sweet kid, polite, not like some of the street kids who get hard real quick." "Where did she go?" Robert asked, hope flaring in his chest. The man pointed toward the south side of the park. "She was talking to Maria. That's the lady who runs the informal soup kitchen under the bridge. Maria tries to help the kids when she can." They found Maria distributing sandwiches and hot coffee from the back of a beat-up van near the Manhattan Bridge. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and hands weathered by years of service to those society had forgotten. "Elizabeth?" Maria's face brightened with recognition when Robert showed her the photo. "Oh, yes, that sweet baby. She was here around 7 o'clock, hungry as anything, but she wouldn't take food unless she could earn it somehow. Insisted on helping me clean up, organizing supplies. Proud little thing." "Where is she now?" Robert's heart was racing. Maria's expression grew concerned. "She left about an hour ago. Said she had somewhere to be. But I could tell she was just being brave. That child has nowhere to go, and it's getting cold tonight. I offered to take her to a shelter, but she got scared and ran off." "Did she say anything else? Anything about where she might go?" Maria studied Robert carefully, taking in his expensive clothes and obvious desperation. "You're him, aren't you? The father she was looking for. She showed me a piece of paper with your name on it." Robert nodded, shame burning in his chest. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know who she was when she came to me. I turned her away." "That child talked about you like you were some kind of hero," Maria said softly. "Said her mama told her that her daddy was a good man who would take care of her if anything ever happened. She believed that with all her heart." The words hit Robert like physical blows. Elizabeth had been carrying an image of him as a protector, a savior, a loving father who would rescue her from her nightmare. Instead, she had found a cold stranger who crushed her hope with casual cruelty. "Please," Robert whispered, "if you see her again, if she comes back, call me." He handed Maria his card and a stack of cash. "And take this, for your work here, for helping kids like Elizabeth." Maria pocketed the card but pushed the money back toward him. "Keep your money. Mr. Harrison, the only payment I want is knowing that little girl is safe and loved. You find her and make this right." As they left the park, Robert's phone buzzed with a text from Tom, his head of security. "Possible sighting at Penn Station. Small girl sleeping near track 12. We're checking it out." Penn Station at night was a maze of corridors and waiting areas where the homeless sought shelter from the cold. Robert and Detective Santos met Tom near the Amtrak departures board, where a small figure was curled up on a bench, covered by what looked like newspaper. Robert's heart leaped as they approached, but as they got closer, he could see it wasn't Elizabeth. The girl was younger, maybe 5 or 6, and when she looked up at them with frightened eyes, Robert saw his daughter's future if he didn't find her soon. "We'll keep looking," Santos said quietly, as they watched transit police gently wake the little girl and connect her with social services. "The night's still young, and we have teams all over the city." But as they walked back to the car, Robert felt time running out like sand through his fingers. Elizabeth was out there somewhere in the cold October night, alone and afraid, believing that the man who was supposed to protect her had abandoned her just like everyone else in her short life. The worst part was that she was right. He had abandoned her, not just this morning, but for 8 years before that. He had chosen his empire of glass and steel over love, chosen fear over connection, chosen to become exactly the kind of man who would turn away a starving child because helping her might make him vulnerable. Now, as he climbed back into his Bentley to continue the search, Robert made a promise to the daughter he had failed. If it took every dollar he had, every connection he'd built, every remaining day of his life, he would find Elizabeth Harrison and spend the rest of his time on Earth, trying to become the father she had dreamed he could be. But first, he had to find her. And as the city clock struck midnight, that was beginning to feel like the hardest thing he had ever tried to do. Dawn was breaking grey and cold over Manhattan as Robert sat in his Bentley outside the Harrison Industries building, staring up at the tower that had once represented everything he thought he wanted. He hadn't slept, hadn't showered, hadn't changed clothes. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his 5 o'clock shadow having grown into something closer to a beard, his expensive suit wrinkled from 18 hours of searching the city. The search for Elizabeth had consumed the entire night with no results. Every lead had turned into a dead end. Every possible sighting had been another lost child, another broken dream, another reminder of how many forgotten souls wandered the streets of his city. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, investors, business partners. The stock price for Harrison Industries had dropped 3 points overnight as word spread that the CEO had vanished in the middle of a major merger. Robert deleted each message without reading it. Money, deals, acquisitions, they all seemed like games played by children now, meaningless distractions from what actually mattered. "Sir?" Margaret's voice was gentle as she slid into the passenger seat. She looked as exhausted as he felt, having coordinated the search efforts through the night. "I have some updates." Robert turned to look at her, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "The teams have covered most of Manhattan and significant portions of Brooklyn and Queens. We've checked hospitals, shelters, subway tunnels, abandoned buildings. Detective Santos has expanded the search to include New Jersey and Westchester County." Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "But sir, it's been almost 24 hours, if Elizabeth is still on the streets." She didn't finish the sentence, but Robert understood. An 8-year-old girl alone in New York City for a full day and night. The possibilities were too terrifying to contemplate. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "I've been going through old records, trying to build a timeline of Sarah and Elizabeth's life. I found something in the financial records that you should know about." Robert waited, sensing bad news approaching. "Sarah tried to contact you multiple times over the years, not directly, but through official channels. She applied for child support when Elizabeth was 2. The request went to our legal department, but it was dismissed as fraudulent because there was no proof of paternity. She tried again when Elizabeth was 4, then 6. Each time, our lawyers sent cease and desist letters. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Sarah had been trying to reach him for years, trying to get help for their daughter, and his own legal team had been blocking her, treating her like a scammer trying to con money from a rich man. "I never saw any of this," Robert said, his voice breaking. "The legal department has standing orders to handle all paternity claims and harassment accusations without bothering you. They thought they were protecting your interests." Robert laughed bitterly. "Protecting my interests? They were protecting me from my own daughter." His phone rang, and he answered immediately when he saw Detective Santos's number. "Mr. Harrison, we need you to come to Bellevue Hospital immediately. We may have found Elizabeth." Robert's heart stopped. Is she alive? Please just come as quickly as you can. I'll meet you in the emergency department." Sure, the drive to Bellevue took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Robert burst through the emergency room doors to find Detective Santos waiting with a doctor and 2 nurses. Their expressions were somber, professional, but Robert could read the truth in their eyes before anyone spoke a word. "Mr. Harrison, Dr." Jennifer Walsh stepped forward, her voice gentle but direct. "We have a young girl here who matches Elizabeth's description. She was brought in by paramedics about an hour ago. Can I see her?" Robert's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Walsh exchanged glances with Detective Santos. "Sir, I need to prepare you. She was found in an alley in the Lower East Side. A jogger discovered her this morning and called 911. She appears to have been there for several hours." Robert felt the world tilting on its axis. Several hours. What does that mean? "Mr. Harrison." Dr. Walsh's voice was infinitely compassionate. "The young girl we have here passed away sometime during the night. The preliminary cause appears to be exposure and malnutrition. I'm very sorry." The words hit Robert like a sledgehammer to the chest. He staggered backward, his vision blurring, his lungs refusing to draw breath. Elizabeth was dead. His daughter, the little girl who had believed he would save her, had died alone in an alley while he was building an empire that meant nothing without her in it. "I need to see her," he managed to say. They led him to a small room where Elizabeth lay on a hospital bed, covered by a white sheet. She looked even smaller than she had outside his building. Her face peaceful in death, but bearing the marks of a life that had been far too hard for someone so young. Robert approached the bed on unsteady legs and gently pulled back the sheet to see her face. This was his daughter, his little girl, the child who had carried his name in her heart and his address in her backpack, who had spent her last days searching for a father who would love and protect her. She was still clutching something in her small hand. Robert gently pried her fingers open and found a crumpled piece of paper. the same birth certificate that had started this nightmare. But now he noticed something written on the back in a child's careful handwriting. "My daddy's name is Robert Harrison. He is a good man. Mama said he will love me when he finds me. I hope he finds me soon, because I miss her so much, and I'm so tired of being alone." Robert collapsed into the chair beside the bed, great sobs tearing from his chest as the full weight of his failure crashed down on him. Elizabeth had died believing he was good, believing he would save her, never knowing that he was the monster who had turned her away in her moment of greatest need. "She was found about 6 blocks from where she approached you yesterday morning," Detective Santos said quietly. "She had been trying to get back to that area. The security guard at your building said she had been sitting across the street most of yesterday afternoon, watching the entrance." Elizabeth had returned to him. Even after his cruelty, she had gone back to the place where she thought her father would find her. She had died waiting for him to come back and make things right. Robert Harrison, the man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve with money or power, sat beside his daughter's body and realized that he had just encountered the first failure in his life that could never be fixed. Elizabeth was gone, and no amount of wealth, no business deal, no legal maneuvering could bring her back. All he could do now was live with the knowledge that when his daughter needed him most, he had chosen to be exactly the kind of man who would let a child die rather than show an ounce of human compassion. The richest man in New York had just discovered he was also the poorest, because he had lost the only thing that could have made him truly wealthy, the love of the daughter he would never get to know. 3 days after Elizabeth's death, Robert stood in the cemetery in Queens where she would be laid to rest. The funeral was small, just Robert, Margaret, Detective Santos, and a few people from the neighborhood where Elizabeth had lived. Maria from the soup kitchen had come, along with Mickey, the building superintendent, and Mrs. Chen from the corner store where Elizabeth had sometimes swept floors in exchange for day-old bread. Robert had insisted on the finest of everything: a mahogany casket that cost more than most people made in a year, flowers that filled half the chapel, a granite headstone engraved with angels. But all the money in the world couldn't change the fundamental tragedy of the moment. He was burying a daughter he had never held, never read bedtime stories to, never taught to ride a bike or helped with homework. "She was a good kid," Mickey said quietly as they gathered around the small grave. "Always polite, always trying to help others even when she didn't have nothing herself. Your Sarah raised her right, Mr. Harrison. Even at the end, Elizabeth never got bitter or mean. She kept believing in people." Robert could barely speak through his grief, but he managed to whisper, "She believed in me. Even after I failed her, she still believed I was good." The service was brief, but heartfelt. Robert had hired a minister who spoke about children being angels on earth, about love transcending death, about hope beyond sorrow. But the words felt hollow to Robert. What hope was there for a man who had murdered his own daughter's faith with his cruelty? As the mourners began to leave, Robert remained behind, kneeling beside the fresh grave. In his hands was Elizabeth's journal, one of the few possessions she had left behind. He had been reading it obsessively for 3 days, trying to understand the daughter he would never know. The entries were heartbreaking in their innocence and resilience. September 5th. Started at a new school today. The kids made fun of my clothes. But teacher says what matters is what's inside your heart. I hope that's true because Mama says I have a big heart like my daddy. September 20th. Mama's getting sicker. She tries to hide it, but I can tell. I've been saving my lunch money to buy her medicine. I'm not very hungry anyway. October 1st, Mama told me about my daddy today. She showed me his picture from when they were young. He looks kind. She says he has grey eyes like mine and that he's very smart. I hope someday I can meet him and make him proud. October 12th. Mama went to heaven last night. The ladies from social services want to take me away, but I ran. Mama said if anything happened to her, I should find my daddy. She said he would take care of me. I'm scared, but I'm going to be brave like she taught me. October 14th. Tomorrow, I'm going to find my daddy. Mama said he works in a big building with glass. I'm nervous but excited. I know he'll help me because Mama said he has a good heart. The entry ended there. The next day, Elizabeth had found him, and he had destroyed her last hope with 6 words, "I don't help strangers." Robert closed the journal and made a promise to the small grave before him. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure no other child suffers like you did. I'm going to become the man you thought I was, even though it's too late for us." As he finally stood to leave, Robert felt the weight of his transformation beginning, from the monster who had killed his daughter's dreams to the man who would honor her memory by saving others. 6 months after Elizabeth's funeral, Robert Harrison was unrecognizable. The cold billionaire who once ruled Manhattan's business district now sat in his transformed office, surrounded by case files of homeless children instead of merger documents. The Harrison Industries building had been converted. The ground floor now housed the Elizabeth Harrison Foundation, a comprehensive support center for homeless families. Social workers, counselors, and volunteers filled spaces once occupied by intimidating executives. "Mr. Harrison, the board is requesting another meeting," Margaret said quietly. "They're concerned about expenses. We're spending $12 million monthly." Robert reviewed files of children who reminded him of Elizabeth: 8-year-old Marcus, whose mother died of addiction; 10-year-old Sophia, living in her family's car; 6-year-old twins abandoned at a subway station. "Tell them we're not cutting funding," Robert replied. "If anything, we need to expand." The foundation was bleeding money. Robert had liquidated half his assets, sold luxury properties, and redirected company profits. Business press called him everything from saint to madman, but he didn't care about opinions anymore. What mattered were children sleeping safely tonight instead of in doorways. What mattered were families getting medical care and housing. What mattered was ensuring no other child died alone because adults failed them. Dr. Patricia Williams from Child Protective Services entered with disturbing news. "We've been investigating circumstances around Elizabeth's death. She wasn't the first child to approach a wealthy individual and be refused help. 6 other children died after being turned away by people who could have helped them." The words devastated Robert. Elizabeth's death wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern of systemic failure. 3 of those children had tried contacting biological fathers who abandoned them, just like Elizabeth tried contacting you. Robert's hands shook. "What do you need from me?" "Expand the Foundation's mission. Actively search for lost children and reconnect them with family members. Create legal pathways for parents wanting to make amends. Change the culture, allowing successful people to ignore consequences of their choices." Robert thought of Elizabeth's journal, her excitement about meeting her father. He thought of other children carrying similar hopes, believing somewhere was someone who loved them. Yes, whatever it takes. Elizabeth died believing I was good, and I failed her. Maybe I can still prove she was right about who I could become. Elizabeth had died believing her father was a hero. Robert was finally ready to try becoming the man she thought he was. The war room on the 30th floor looked like a military operation. Maps covered walls, marked with red pins for homeless children locations, yellow for successful reunifications, and black pins, too many, for children who died on streets. Robert addressed his team of investigators, social workers, and legal experts. The foundation had evolved from simple charity into something more ambitious, a force hunting down absent parents and confronting them with abandoned children. "Team leaders, status report," Robert asked. Sarah Martinez, head investigator and former NYPD detective, stepped forward. We've identified 47 children on streets with biological parents having significant resources. 12 parents are business executives, 8 politicians, 6 celebrities. Any responding to outreach? 3 agreed to meet their children, 2 hired lawyers to prevent contact. Rest are ignoring us or denying paternity despite DNA evidence. Robert felt familiar anger, fury once driving business ambitions now channeled toward parents abandoning children to die on streets. The Morrison case? Dr. Jennifer Walsh opened a heartbreaking file. 7-year-old Daniel Morrison, father is William Morrison. CEO of Morrison Financial. Boys lived in shelters 3 months since mother died of cancer. William claims he's never heard of the child despite DNA evidence and records showing he paid mother's apartment rent. And Daniel? Malnourished, showing abandonment trauma. Asks daily when daddy's coming. Carries business card his dying mother gave him. Parallels to Elizabeth's story were stark. Another child, another business card, another parent choosing denial over responsibility. Schedule face-to-face with William Morrison, Robert ordered. Sir, Morrison threatened lawsuits, claiming we're running extortion, legal counsel warned. Extortion? We're saving his son's life. People like Morrison see acknowledging children as threats to constructed lives. They have wives, legitimate children, reputations. Abandoned children represent chaos they can't control. So they let children die rather than face embarrassment, just like I did. Robert looked at the city map, thinking of children going to sleep hungry tonight, clutching photographs, believing somewhere was someone who loved them enough to save them. Elizabeth had died believing he was good. Every child he saved now was a step closer to proving she was right. The confrontation with William Morrison took place in a downtown law firm. Robert sat across from a man who could have been his reflection from a year ago, coldly professional, radiating arrogance from never facing real consequences. I won't be blackmailed into acknowledging some street rat as my son, Morrison declared condescendingly. Daniel isn't a street rat. He's a 7-year-old carrying your business card because his dying mother said you'd take care of him. Morrison's lawyer slid legal documents across the table, barriers designed to prevent contact between Morrison and his son. Robert pulled out his own folder. Daniel's mother was Rebecca Chen, paralegal at your company, 2015-2017. HR records show your relationship, emails, dinner receipts, hotel reservations where she accompanied you on business trips. Morrison's face flushed slightly. That proves nothing. Casual relationships don't make me responsible for every child born afterward. DNA results show Daniel is your son with 99.97% certainty. The boy looks exactly like your childhood photos from newspaper profiles. Even if biologically mine, I have no obligation to disrupt my life for an 8-year-old mistake. I have a wife, legitimate children, reputation to protect. Robert heard echoes of his own thoughts when Elizabeth approached him, shame burning through him. Daniel asks every night when Daddy's coming home. He's malnourished, living in shelters 3 months. That's unfortunate, but not my problem, Morrison replied with clinical detachment. Robert felt careful control evaporating. I want to tell you about my daughter Elizabeth. 8 months ago, she approached me asking for food, starving, homeless, desperate. I told her exactly what you told me. I don't help strangers. Get a job, not my responsibility. The room fell silent. 3 days later, I found her dead body in an alley. She died of exposure and malnutrition, clutching my business card, believing somewhere was a father who loved her. Robert's voice broke. Elizabeth was my biological daughter, and I killed her with cruelty and indifference, just like you're killing Daniel. Morrison stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Daniel drew you a picture. 3 hours with shelter crayons. Shows a man in a business suit, his daddy, coming to take him to a house with gardens. He's saving it for when you finally come. Morrison stopped at the door. He's 7, same age Elizabeth was, same age I was when my father abandoned me. The cycle repeats until someone breaks it. 3 days later, Sarah called at dawn. Robert, get to the foundation immediately. William Morrison is here asking to see Daniel. Robert arrived to see William Morrison kneeling beside his 7-year-old son, both crying as Daniel finally gave his father the saved picture. Elizabeth died, believing Robert was good. For the first time since her death, he began believing she might have been right. 1 year after Elizabeth's death, Robert stood before 300 people in the Foundation's renovated auditorium. The annual gala celebrated achievements. 1,247 homeless children provided shelter, 89 successful family reunifications, 78% success rate in stable housing. But Robert's mind focused on the empty chair in the front row, where Elizabeth should have been sitting. "A year ago, I was different," Robert began. "I stood for everything this foundation now fights against, believing wealth excused basic compassion, that we could ignore suffering, that children like those we serve were less deserving of love." The audience included William Morrison with son Daniel, both healthy and happy, plus dozens of parents who chose facing past mistakes over letting children die. "I want to tell you about the moment that changed my life. Meeting my daughter Elizabeth for the first and last time." Complete silence fell. Even those familiar with Elizabeth's story remained moved by Robert's telling. October 16th, 2023. Elizabeth approached me outside my building, 8 years old, homeless, starving, living on streets 6 weeks after her mother died. When she asked me, her father, for help, I said I don't help strangers. Robert steadied himself. 3 days later, Elizabeth died alone, carrying my business card. Believing somewhere was a father who loved her enough to save her. She died because I chose pride over compassion, reputation over responsibility. Recognition flickered across faces. Many in this room had their own moral failures, abandoned children, chances to choose love over convenience. But Elizabeth's death taught me, failed children don't disappear. They become statistics: homelessness, crime, addiction, mortality. Every abandoned child becomes someone else's problem until they become no one's. Robert gestured to families present. William Morrison is here because he learned what I learned too late. Acknowledging mistakes doesn't destroy life, it saves it. William stood with Daniel. "Mr. Harrison saved my son's life, but more importantly, mine. I was becoming the same man who turned away his daughter." Robert announced expansion. The Elizabeth Harrison Foundation launches the National Parent Accountability Project. We've identified 3,000 children in poverty, with biological parents having financial means to help. We'll find those parents, confront them with responsibility, create consequences for choosing abandonment. Thunderous applause followed. "This won't be popular. We'll make powerful enemies, face lawsuits, threats. But Elizabeth died believing I was good, and I'll spend my life proving she was right." 6-year-old Maria Santos tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Harrison, do you think Elizabeth watches over us as an angel?" Robert knelt down. "Elizabeth is why we're here, sweetheart. Every child we help honors her memory." Maria hugged him. "Then she must be really happy tonight." Robert felt peace he hadn't experienced since Elizabeth's death. Not absence of grief, but knowledge that Elizabeth's life continued saving others, that her death had meaning beyond tragedy. The empty chair reminded him of failure, but the room full of saved children reminded him failure didn't end the story. Sometimes it began a better one. 2 years after Elizabeth's death, Robert Harrison found himself in the most important battle of his transformed life, testifying before a congressional subcommittee on child welfare reform. The same ruthless business skills that had once made him Manhattan's most feared CEO were now being deployed in service of the nation's most vulnerable children. The hearing room in the Hart Senate office building was packed to capacity with reporters, child welfare advocates, lobbyists, and families whose lives had been transformed by the Foundation's work. Camera crews from major networks lined the walls, and Robert could feel the weight of national attention focused on this moment. "Mr. Harrison," Senator Patricia Reynolds addressed him from the committee dais, her voice carrying the formal tone of official proceedings. "Your Foundation's Parent Accountability Project has generated significant controversy across the nation. Critics argue that you're essentially blackmailing wealthy individuals into acknowledging children they may not have known existed." Robert adjusted his microphone and looked directly at the senator. He was no longer the impeccably groomed businessman who had once commanded boardrooms with intimidation and fear. His appearance was more casual now, his manner more approachable, but his intensity remained undimmed. "Senator Reynolds, with all due respect, no one is being blackmailed. We're simply confronting parents with the truth about their children and the consequences of abandonment. If acknowledging your own biological child feels like blackmail, perhaps that says more about the parent's character than it does about our methods." In the gallery, Robert could see Daniel Morrison, now 9 years old and thriving, sitting beside his father William. Their presence served as living proof of what was possible when parents chose courage over cowardice, love over convenience. Senator James Crawford, a vocal critic of the Foundation who had been particularly hostile in pre-hearing interviews, leaned forward with obvious antagonism. "Mr. Harrison, your organization has been accused of harassment, invasion of privacy, and deliberately disrupting stable families. Don't you think there are legal and ethical boundaries to this crusade of yours?" Robert had been preparing for this exact question for months, working with his legal team and child advocacy experts to craft a response that would be both truthful and compelling. "Senator Crawford, let me ask you something. If a parent chooses not to feed their child, we call it neglect and remove the child from the home. If a parent chooses not to provide medical care, we prosecute them for child endangerment. But if a wealthy parent chooses to let their biological child live on the streets and die of starvation, we call it a private family matter. How exactly do you explain that double standard?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Robert could see several committee members shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. The Foundation's exhaustive research had revealed that 12 sitting members of Congress had biological children they had never acknowledged or supported financially. "The children we're fighting for aren't abstract policy issues or political talking points," Robert continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "They're human beings with names and faces and dreams and the same right to life and love as any other child in America." Robert activated the presentation screen behind him, displaying photographs and detailed case studies that had been prepared specifically for this hearing. Marcus Williams, age 10. His father is a Fortune 500 CEO who spent more money on his yacht's annual maintenance than it would cost to house, feed, and educate Marcus for 5 years. Marcus lived in subway tunnels for 8 months before our teams found him, eating garbage and sleeping on cardboard. The images continued in heartbreaking succession. Children living in unimaginable squalor while their wealthy parents lived in luxury mere miles away. Kids carrying worn photographs of fathers who denied their very existence. Families destroyed by pride and shame and willful blindness. Sophia Martinez, age 8. Her father is a United States senator who campaigns on family values while his daughter lived in a car with her dying mother. Robert let that revelation sink in before continuing. "We successfully reunited them 6 months ago. Sophia is now in private school, receiving proper medical care, and most importantly, she knows she's loved. The Parent Accountability Project isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about basic parental responsibility. We've successfully reunited 347 children with their biological parents in the past year alone. The success rate for these reunifications is 92%, far higher than traditional foster care placements. Senator Reynolds consulted her notes carefully before asking the question Robert had been dreading. Mr. Harrison, I have to ask about the personal motivation behind this work. Your own daughter Elizabeth died under tragic circumstances that you've been very public about. Some critics suggest that your foundation is really about managing your own guilt rather than genuinely helping children. How do you respond to that accusation? Robert felt the familiar pain lance through his chest at the mention of Elizabeth's name, but he had learned to channel that grief into purpose rather than letting it paralyze him. Senator, you're absolutely right. This work is about guilt, my guilt, and the guilt of every parent who has chosen convenience over compassion, reputation over responsibility. Elizabeth died because I was exactly the kind of man your critics are defending, someone who believed that wealth and success excused him from basic human decency. Robert's voice grew stronger as he continued, fueled by 2 years of transformation and thousands of hours spent with rescued children. But guilt without action is just self-pity. Elizabeth died believing I was a good man, and every child we save is proof that maybe she was right about who I could become. If that makes me guilty of using personal tragedy to motivate positive change, then I accept that charge completely. The hearing room erupted in spontaneous applause, but Robert held up his hand for silence. He wasn't finished. I want to close with a simple challenge to this committee and to every parent listening to this testimony. The children we're fighting for didn't choose to be born into difficult circumstances. They didn't choose poverty or abandonment or neglect. The only choice they made was to believe that somewhere in the world was a parent who loved them enough to save them. If we can't honor that faith, if we can't protect the most vulnerable among us, then what kind of society are we really building for the next generation? The committee would ultimately pass the Child Welfare Accountability Act by a vote of 14-3, creating federal support for family reunification programs and establishing new legal frameworks for parental responsibility. The Elizabeth Harrison Foundation would receive $50 million in government funding to expand operations to all 50 states. But for Robert, the real victory wasn't in the legislation or the funding. It was in the letter he received that evening from Daniel Morrison, written in a 9-year-old's careful handwriting. Dear Mr. Harrison, thank you for making my daddy come find me. I know you're still sad about Elizabeth, but I think she would be really proud of you. My daddy says you saved both of us. And I hope someday I can help kids like you helped me. Love? Daniel Robert framed the letter and placed it on his desk next to Elizabeth's photograph. Elizabeth had died believing he was a hero. And 2 years later, children across the country were alive and thriving because he had finally found the courage to become the man she always thought he could be. 5 years had passed since that October morning when Elizabeth Harrison approached her father outside his glass tower, and the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Elizabeth Harrison Foundation had become a national institution with offices in all 50 states, responsible for reuniting over 8,000 children with their biological parents and providing comprehensive support services to more than 25,000 families across America. Robert Harrison, now 47, but bearing the weight of his mission in every line of his face, stood before the largest gathering in the Foundation's history. The grand ballroom of the Washington, D.C. Convention Center was packed with over 2,000 people. social workers, government officials, celebrities, business leaders, and most importantly, hundreds of families whose lives had been transformed by the Foundation's work. Today marked the 5th anniversary of Elizabeth's death, and Robert was announcing the completion of the project that had consumed his life for the past 3 years. The Elizabeth Harrison National Children's Village. 5 years ago, Robert began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's advanced sound system, I was a different man, living a different life. I believed that success was measured only in dollars accumulated, that compassion was a weakness to be avoided, and that the suffering of others was completely irrelevant to my existence. I was wrong about everything that actually mattered in life. In the front row sat families that had become symbols of the Foundation's success. Daniel Morrison, now 12 years old and an honor student, sitting proudly beside his father William. The Chen family, reunited after 3 years of separation. Maria Santos, the little girl who had asked about Elizabeth becoming an angel, now 11 and thriving in her adopted family. But Robert's eyes kept returning to the empty chair beside his podium. The chair where Elizabeth should have been sitting as a 13-year-old, full of dreams and possibilities, ready to change the world in her own way. Elizabeth Harrison lived for 8 years, believing that somewhere in this vast world was a father who loved her unconditionally and would protect her from harm. When she finally found the courage to approach me on that October morning, I destroyed that belief with 6 devastating words: I don't help strangers. 3 days later, she died alone in an alley, still carrying my business card, still hoping against hope that I would come back for her. The audience, though familiar with Elizabeth's story from countless retellings, remained completely silent. Robert's ability to tell his daughter's story without minimizing his own culpability or seeking sympathy had become one of his most powerful tools for motivating change in others. But Elizabeth's death revealed a truth that changed not just my life, but the lives of thousands of children across our nation. She wasn't alone. Right now, at this very moment, thousands of children are living Elizabeth's story, abandoned by parents who have the financial resources to help them, dying of neglect and indifference in the richest society in human history. Robert activated the massive presentation screens flanking the stage, displaying statistics that still had the power to shock even seasoned child welfare professionals. Over 15,000 children in America were currently homeless despite having biological parents with significant financial means. The Foundation's 5 years of research had revealed a hidden crisis of parental abandonment that crossed all racial, economic, and social boundaries. The Elizabeth Harrison National Children's Village represents our most ambitious approach to this crisis, Robert continued. As images of the sprawling 500-acre campus in upstate New York filled the screens, we're not just reuniting families anymore, we're building entirely new ones from scratch. The footage showed children who could have been Elizabeth living lives she had only imagined in her crayon drawings, playing in gardens that looked like paradise, studying in classrooms filled with natural light and hope, participating in sports and arts programs, living in small group homes where they were valued and protected by house parents who had committed to loving them as their own. The village currently houses 247 children who could not be reunited with their biological parents, Robert explained, his voice filled with pride and emotion. But here's what makes this place special. These aren't institutionalized children waiting to age out of the system. These are sons and daughters who wake up every morning knowing they are loved, who go to sleep every night feeling safe and valued. Robert paused, looking out at the audience filled with people who had dedicated their lives to fighting for children like Elizabeth. But the village's true purpose isn't just providing homes for the homeless. It's proving that Elizabeth was right about human nature. She died believing that people were fundamentally good, that love was stronger than fear, that hope could survive even the darkest circumstances. The presentation shifted to show success stories. Children from the village who had gone on to college, started their own families, launched careers, and most importantly, learned to love and trust again after experiencing abandonment. Every child playing in those gardens, studying in those classrooms, sleeping safely in those homes, is living proof that Elizabeth's faith in humanity wasn't misplaced. Robert continued, his voice growing stronger with emotion. She believed that her father was a hero who would save her, and though I failed her in that moment, maybe I can still become the man she thought I was. Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out Elizabeth's journal, the same worn notebook he had found in her tiny room 5 years ago. I want to close by reading Elizabeth's final entry, written the night before she came to find me. His voice broke slightly as he read, "Tomorrow I'm going to find my daddy. Mama said he works in a big building with glass walls. I'm nervous but excited. I know he'll help me because Mama said he has a good heart, just like mine. I can't wait to finally meet him and tell him how much I love him." The ballroom was absolutely silent, except for the sound of people crying. "Elizabeth was right about me," Robert said, his own tears flowing freely now. "I did have a good heart. It just took losing her to find it again. The Elizabeth Harrison Foundation will continue its work until every single child in America knows they are loved, valued, and worthy of protection. Because that's what Elizabeth would have wanted. And it's what she deserved from the father who failed her." As sustained applause filled the enormous ballroom, Robert felt Elizabeth's presence more powerfully than ever before. The scared, hungry little girl who had approached him outside his building had become the moral compass guiding not just his transformed life, but a national movement that had saved thousands of children. Her death had been an unspeakable tragedy, but her legacy was something beautiful. Hundreds of saved lives, rebuilt families, and a growing army of parents who were choosing love over fear, courage over convenience. Robert Harrison had spent the first 42 years of his life building an empire based on ambition and greed. Now he was spending the rest of his life building a legacy based on love and redemption, one rescued child at a time. Elizabeth had died believing he was a hero, and 5 years later he had finally found the courage to prove that maybe, just maybe, she had been right about him all along. The empty chair would always remind him of his greatest failure, but the thousands of children sleeping safely tonight because of her memory proved that failure didn't have to be the end of any story. Sometimes it was just the beginning of a much better one.